Good morning, everyone. We're going to be discussing the cemetery module today. So I'm John Morgan, and then Chris Gath, he'll be presenting a little bit later here. We're going to take you through the ins and outs of the cemetery software as a whole. And without further ado, let's get started here. All right, so we're going through the eyes of our newest cemetery sexton here. Her name is Bernice. She is taken over Brutus Bucka, our fiscal officer. He's a busy man, especially come October, November, somewhere in there. So he's hired on a dedicated cemetery sexton. So his wife Bernice here, Bernice Bucka, she's taken over the cemetery sexton duty. So from her eyes, that's what our presentation is going to be looking at today. So she comes in, sits down, has no idea about anything with the cemetery software. So she's gotten a little frustrated here. So she may be in the audience today. But we'll take you through the ins and outs. So first and foremost, the cemetery software is fully separate from the UAN accounting software. There's no additional cost for it, and for that matter, it doesn't even need to be installed on the UAN computer. We do have some entities that have a separate cemetery sexton computer, whether it's in Township Hall, in Village Hall, or at some remote site. So like I said, it doesn't even need to be installed on the same computer. It doesn't have to be the same person handling all of this. But the only kicker to that is you will need to request an installation disk or a link from UAN support. It's not something that's included in our routine accounting releases. So, the 2022.1, 2, 3, those types of releases, the cemetery software is not included in that. So you would need to contact us to get the download link or to get an installation disk sent out to you. Within that email or phone call, make sure it's not you that is you, the fiscal officer that is handling cemetery duties. Make sure to pass along the contact information for whoever is handling the cemetery software. Reason being, if they need to call into our support line or email us, we're not able to help if they're not listed on our UAN profile. So make sure to include that if you do have a dedicated cemetery sexton or anyone who handles cemetery specifically. That way that we can get them added to the UAN profile so that they can call in and receive assistance. So first things first, for Bernice's first step here, she needs to set herself up as a new user here. So Brutus gave her his login credentials just to get the job done here. So in order to set up a new user, we're going to go through Cemetery Maintenance Users. And that'll bring up this screen here. You can see we've got Brutus and our generic cemetery user here. So we need to add Bernice in, so we're going to click the Add button up here in the top left. And that'll pop open the Add User screen. So you'll see that the cemetery software, we only have 3 roles: Administrator, Transaction Reports, and Read Only. You can think a little bit of like the accounting software here. So the administrator has full access to the software. Transaction reports, that would be more geared towards the power user role in the main UAN software. So basically, you can post burials, you can sell graves, you can do pretty much all your day-to-day transactions. You just wouldn't have access to the inner workings, your entity setups and major changes to the software. And then read only is just strictly a reporting role. So any user that's set up with read only, you're only going to be able to view reports, view burials. You're not going to be able to affect the software in any way. So for our purposes, since Bernice has taken over the full cemetery duties, we're going to add her in as an administrator here, and we'll click the Save button. And you may think, well, there was nowhere to put in a password. So again, much like the main UAN software, the first time you set up a user, it'll prompt to say that the main password for that user for the first logon is going to be all lowercase UAN, and then at that point, the new user is going to be able to pick their permanent password. That's so there's not, no one knows the password to the software but you. So it's a security measure to make sure, everybody doesn't know everybody's password. So user maintenance, a lot of the screens are going to, would look like this normally. Through a webinar, it's probably going to be a little bit of an eyesore with all the small writing. So you may see the breakdown happen like this. So we'll, here are the highlighted boxes of what we're going to be, dealing with here. So we may condense it into a little more, eye-friendly format like this. So if you see this, it's not going to be the exact layout of the software, but it's just for presentation purposes so everybody can see a little bit better. So in the users menu, we've got a couple of options here. We've got edit. That's going to take you back basically to that ad screen where you can edit a user's profile. Most likely that would be somebody, maybe you had an assistant that handled the cemetery duties and as far as day-to-day transactions, but you want them to just be fully in charge. You could go in and change their role from transactions to administrator at that point. We also have a reset password, so if you're an administrator with an assistant, you can go in, reset the assistant's password without having to call UAN. Activate and deactivate, that would be as far as if a cemetery sexton leaves, you can deactivate them. That way they no longer show up, can no longer log into the software. But then if they would come back, you can activate them again, and they can pick up where they left off. And then delete is a very special use button. It can only be if there's been no activity on the profile. So, if we, let's say we added Bernice and, come to find out we forgot the E in Bernice, the first E, then we could go in and delete it and just re-add her with the correct spelling. So that would be one use for that button. But like I said, it's very limited use because there can't be any transactions linked to that user. And then display, probably going to be the least used button here because all it's going to do is bring up, basically username and their role. So there's not going to be a whole lot of use of that button if I'm going to be brutally honest. And with that, now that we've got that all set up, I'm going to take you through what I call the life cycle of a grave. So we're going to discuss a scenario that's going to take you from a grave location that doesn't even exist yet all the way up through recording a burial in that grave. So a little bit of background information here. Sally Washington contacted our cemetery about adding a grave for her sister Michelle. And Michelle and Sally's mother, Mavis, is buried in Buckeye Cemetery, Row C, Grave 1. And there is a spot just beside that grave that would be suitable for adding in a new grave. So let me show you what that looks like here. Here's our beautiful little cemetery. You see that we've got rows A, B, and C. We've got graves 1 through 9. But then we've got off to the left here. This was the spot that was inspected, and it is suitable for a grave. And then you see the highlighted one just beside that. That's where Mavis is currently buried. But that gives us a little bit of a dilemma here, because as far as recording in the cemetery software, we could make that grave 1, but then grave 1 would become grave 2 would become grave 3, and you would have to do a bunch of transfers, buybacks, sells, all that fun stuff, undoing burials, redoing burials. It would be a hefty process to make that grave number 1. So we're going to work a little smarter here, and we're just going to add it in as grave 0. And you can see that way everything stays a little bit pretty. All the 9s line up, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1s blast off, and we will just have one grave 0 then. So other than doing the hard work that our little bobblehead friend here's doing, we do have a little bit of setup needed to record the burial in the cemetery software. So we've got 5 steps that I'm going to take you through here. Add the option for a grave 0, add grave 0 to row C, sell the grave, generate a deed, and then bury someone in the grave. These bottom three with this little curly Q icon, it's going to be the what I consider your routine entries. So your day-to-day transactions, you would generally just sell, produce a deed, and then record a burial. The top two, they're going to be special purpose, much like in our case where it was the because we don't have an official grave there yet. That's why we're having to do those steps. All right, so first things first, like I said, right now we don't have an option for grave 0, so we'll need to add that into the software, and we do that through cemetery, maintenance, structures, and that'll bring up our structures screen here. We're a relatively small cemetery here at Buckeye Cemetery, so we don't have a whole lot of structures, but you'll see that we do have the option for up to 8. So right now we've just got cemetery, row, and grave. If you've got an even smaller cemetery, you may just have a cemetery and grave breakdown. Those are the two required structures. Structures 2 through 7, they would be considered optional. But you can add up to, so if you've got cemetery, plot, row, grave, or any other breakdown, you can use this to basically make your setup match the reality of your cemetery. So in our case, the only thing that needs to be affected, we're not adding a new row. We didn't acquire another cemetery. We just need to add another grave number in. So we're going to select the grave option and hit edit. And that'll bring up our edit structure screen here. You see that we've just got the options 1 through 9 right now. So down here in our little green box, we're going to enter 00 just to keep the numbering sequence, keep it in line with the others with the 2 digits. And then we click the up arrow, and that brings it up and makes it available as an option in the cemetery design screen. We'll go through that here in just a moment. So we'll click save. And now we're ready to actually add in grave 0 to row C. So that's done under cemetery maintenance, cemetery design. And this will bring up a list of all of your graves that are currently in the cemetery software. You can see, for example, we've got row A, graves 1 through 6 showing, as well as status, occupied, purchased. Currently, row C, grave 0 would not show up here. So that's why we need to add it in using the add plots button. That'll bring up our cemetery design wizard. So we'll click next. And again, we have a very simple setup with our cemetery. We've only got one cemetery, that's Buckeye, so we'll select it and hit next. We're only adding grave 0 to row C though. So we'll select row C and then click next. And then we'll only select grave number 0. And then we'll select next again, and it'll confirm the new cemetery plots that are going to be added. In our case, we're only adding one. Everything looks right here, so we'll go ahead and click finish. And then back in the cemetery design screen, I did a little bit of filtering here, but now you can see that we've got row C up and we've got grave 0 and its status is available. So that would mean that it is able to be sold. It's available in the system for further transactions, basically. All right, so now we've got our little curly Q here, so we're starting our routine transactions. So we're going to go through cemetery transactions owners first. So when you sell a grave, best practice is to add the owner in first. It's a little easier to keep the whole process straight, just in my opinion, that to go through this way. So that'll bring up the owner screen here, and we would have a pop quiz if we could, but who would be the owner of this grave? Remember, Sally contacted us on behalf of Michelle. Well, Sally's going to be the one, signing all the paperwork. Sally's the one, purchasing the grave, giving us the check or money order, or cash, what have you. So for all intents and purposes, Sally is going to be the owner of this grave. So we're going to click add, And that'll bring up the Add Owner screen. Through the magic television, we just brought in all of her information and click Save. And now we'll need to sell the grave to her. So just adding an owner, it doesn't assign any specific grave to that owner. You have to actually sell it to them. So that's under Cemetery Transactions Sell. And that'll bring up the Sell Plots screen. You'll see at the top, we've got a place for deed number, in our case, BKI, Buckeye, and then grave C00. We've got a very simple deed numbering format for our cemetery. The date of the sale was April 6th, and it was paid in the amount of $100. So you'll see we can click on the purchaser drop down here, and Sally Catherine Washington is there from Buckeye, Ohio. That's why we go through that owner screen first. You do have the option to add an owner from this screen, but it's stacks windows on top of windows. I think it gets a little messy, so I'm in the camp of add the owner first, then sell the plot for that reason. So we'll select Sally, and you'll see small cemetery. We don't have any other available graves other than C00 down at the bottom. Just be absolutely certain that you're selecting the correct grave here, because depending on the size of your cemetery or availability, you may have 50, 60, 70 graves show up here. So just be cognizant of that. It does break it down by cemetery at least, so if you are one of those entities that have 2, 3, 4 cemeteries, it at least breaks it down with that. But otherwise, I mean, you would have to find the grave through the list of available graves. In our case, we've selected C00, and we'll click Save, and that takes us through the print deed screen all in one. So once you click Save, it gives you a little pop-up. We'll say yes to that. And this isn't going to be your ordinary, print screen. Where it comes up, is that the right printer? Okay, select print, job done. A little more hands-on than that. In our case, we've got a couple of items to review here. Sherry Trustee, she is the official that signs all of our cemetery deeds. So we check mark her here so that her name prints on the deed as the official. And then over in the owners and plots section, up in the top right, you'll see the required green box here. This will change the verbiage slightly for the deed. So it'll have his, her there. So just select the correct pronoun given the situation. In our case, Sally, we're going to select her, and then we've got the print button down at the bottom. We do have some other options available in this screen. I would tread lightly with it. If it's your first time, overriding any values or anything like that, give our support line a call just to make sure everything's going to, show up as expected. Because a deed is a legal document, so you want to make sure that all your I's are dotted and T's are crossed before getting it signed. So we'll select print, and there we go. That little animation's the deed spitting out of our printer. All right, so we've got one more step here. This is going to be recording the burial. So we need to go to Cemetery Transactions Burials. And then we're going to click Add. And this is going to really drive home the fact that the owner doesn't necessarily have to be buried in the grave. So this highlighted phrase up at the top there, select decedent from owner box, or manually enter decedent on the tab below. Basically, you can do either or. So if it is the owner, you can select the owner and it'll pull in all the information you added from the owner's box. In our case, the owner is not going to be buried in the grave itself. It's going to be her sister. So we're going to go ahead. We'll select. Come on. maybe we might select, there we go. We're going to select Buckeye grave C00, and we can manually type in Michelle's information. So the required fields are first and last name. Everything else is optional, so if you need to come back to it, you can. We've got birth, death, and burial dates. We've got sex, whether they're a resident, a veteran, if they had a communicable disease. But the most important, if you're using these manual entry fields, is the relation to owner. This is where you're going to record if there is that discrepancy. In our case, the discrepancy of names. So Sally owns the grave, Michelle is buried there. This is where you can record that relation to the owner. Just so that way, if there is another section you come in, you see that, Sally owns the grave, was Michelle buried there? Is that an error? You can look and see, well, no, actually, Michelle is a sibling of Sally. Doesn't necessarily need to be a familial relationship. It could be, some other type of relationship, but they're just record whatever that relationship is, just for future reference if there is that mismatch. We'll also double check the additional information tab here. Again, best practice here. You noticed that Michelle not marked as a veteran, so we don't really have to worry about it right now. But I always recommend just having a look at it just to see if there are any additional information selections that would be applicable. So if Michelle was a veteran, we would be able to put in her branch of military service here. Here in a little bit, Chris is going to take you through adding in and editing these fields in a little more detail. But for right now, there's nothing else really for us to do here. So we're going to click Save. And that's all there is to it. In those 5 easy steps, it sounds like an infomercial, but it is true. In those 5 easy steps, you can go from a grave not existing to recording a burial in it. So now, our cemetery sexton, Bernice, she's at ease. She's zen. All is right in the world. So just remember, though, that the structures in Cemetery Design Wizard, they're only needed if a grave location's not already available in the system. In our case, because we didn't have C00 available, that's why we went through those 2 steps. Also, graves aren't limited to only one burial. We get this question quite a bit, especially with with double depth and cremation graves, where there would be technically more than one person buried in that grave. So you don't need to do anything special with it. In fact, you can just record 2 burials. So you would go through that cemetery transaction burial screen twice, record both burials, and the system would let you do that. You can break it down a little bit more if you want to do, grave 1A and 1B, for example. I wouldn't recommend it, but you can do that if you do have a reason to. And remember, I can't drive this point home enough. The owner does not need to be the one buried in the grave. The owner is the person who's listed on the deed, who signs the paperwork, who pays the fee if you've got a fee. So don't worry about if the owner and the burial aren't matched. It's okay. It's to be expected in some cases. And I know there's going to be a lot of information thrown at you today. I do want to give you one resource here. On our UAN Link website, under the training dropdown, we've got cemetery, and we do have a cemetery manual available. So down here at the bottom, so you can download that, or if you're somewhere that doesn't have an internet connection, on your desktop, you'll have a UAN Tools icon. It'll bring up this screen. You'll select version documentation, and then under manuals, you'll see that there's a cemetery manual on your computer, and that's added when you install the software itself. So 2 places you can get the cemetery manual. It's going to be a little more detailed than our hour-long presentation today, and but it'll be a very good resource for any procedural questions you may have. All right, so we're going to take a couple minutes for questions here. All right, is there room for all 3 trustees to sign the deed? Yes. And so in that where you would select the signatories, Crystal's going to take you through how to add other officials as well as the formatting of the deeds. But you can add multiple trustees to sign that deed. Does the system allow for decimal points in grave numbers? Yes, it should. You would need to make sure that each individual decimal grave number. So for our example, 1 and 1.5. Then uh, those would both need to be available in the structures menu. So that cemetery maintenance structure screen, and then you would select the grave and click add. You would need to add all of your decimal graves in there and then add it through the cemetery design wizard. But yes, you should be able to do that without issue. How many different cemeteries can you have, and can they have different layouts? Yes, with an asterisk to that. So the question was, how many different cemeteries can you have, and can they have different layouts? They can, however, you are still stuck with the structure hierarchy. So, let's say your most specific one goes cemetery, plot, row, grave. And then you have a second cemetery that just has, well, like our example where it was cemetery, row, grave. You would still have to enter something for the plot for the more basic cemetery. So you may put in a placeholder there uh, for that. But yes, for all intents and purposes, you can have different cemeteries with different layouts. You would just need to come up with a way to, put a placeholder in or what have you for situations like I just mentioned. If using the system, are we still required to keep paper cemetery records? That is a good question that I cannot answer. I remember that we are just a software company. We can't give legal advice. So I would discuss that with your entity's legal counsel, county prosecutor, somebody who can give that legal advice. I just don't know what the statutory guidelines are as far as digital versus paper records. All right, last call for questions. We'll give you another minute or two, and then we're going to turn it over to Chris. And like I said, remember, we are going to do a live software demonstration at the very end, so some of these questions we'll answer at that point. All right, so it doesn't look like we've got any more to answer just yet. Let's welcome Chris to the stage.
So I'd like to thank John for starting the presentation. My name, of course, is Chris, and I'm going to be continuing with the cemetery. So buybacks and transfers are going to be not the more common areas, but you will be using them periodically. And so a buyback will allow graves to go from purchase to available, and that will usually happen when it's no longer needed by the client and they'll either sell or just give the grave back to the cemetery. And then a transfers allow the client ownership to be sent from one owner to another. A lot of times that'll happen when parents are transferring ownerships to their children. What we're going to go into a little bit more detail on are going to be the plot details and editors. So the plot details can be used to track grave specific information like monument height and mowing and landscape schedules. The plot editor allows plot details to be edited in bulk, including location information, while the plot details stay attached to the grave regardless of burial status. So basically you're looking at the plot editor to deal with items that affect all the graves within a cemetery or a section of the cemetery, where your plot details are going to be tracking specific items that will change grave to grave. So the plot details we go to by going to cemetery maintenance to your plot details. And then when we go here, we're going to go to bring up the plot details. We will hit add. And here we can put in a name for whatever our plot details are. In our case, in this example, we're going to put in a landscaping day. Our cemetery is going to be, maintenance crews are going to come in and take care of the grass and do all of that fun stuff on a single day. So we're going to want to keep track of that. So we're going to then go to your cemetery, maintenance, plot editor. And from here, we can very simply from the plot details, select the landscaping day, and then we'll be entering the set value. And on Tuesday is when the maintenance people are going to be coming by. And so we're going to just select everything for our cemetery so that everyone will have the same landscaping day selected. You'll also notice that there's a location area. So this location is literally can track your latitude and longitude. The UAN software can't figure that out, so you'd either have to go to Google Maps or use a GPS to get those exact coordinates. But if you do and you get those entered in, you could have something that looks like this. So in our case, you'll see that for row C, we have all the latitude and longitudes already put in, and we're just going to be adding in the new one for row C, grave 00, right here. So we've gone out and using our GPS figured out that the new latitude and longitude is thus. And so we'll end up entering a save. However, in looking down at the C09, we'll notice that its latitude and longitude are just a little off from everything else. Now, when I say a little, you'll soon realize that's quite a number, as latitude numbers, 1 point in latitude is equal to 69 miles, and 1 point in longitude is equal to 54.6 miles. So latitude is going to be off a little less than a point, so that's going to be 50 miles or so to the north of us, but the longitude is way off, and that is almost, over almost 10 points off, which is almost 500 miles, and that's going to be to the east. So this grave is well out of the range of Buckeye Cemetery. So we're going to do a little investigation. We're going to pull up who is in that C9 grave, and we're going to see it is a James Riddle Hoffa. Name's kind of familiar. So we're going to do a little bit more investigating by going to cemetery maintenance, cemetery design. We can kind of bring up exactly what the map looks like, because we've had this all pre-programmed into our Buckeye Cemetery, and we'll see that he is buried at the center of Giant Stadium. That doesn't sound right. So Jimmy Hoffa is not buried at Giant Stadium. He's actually here in Buckeye Cemetery. So we're just going to get those numbers changed to what it should be and then get that saved. Your burial details can include extra information pertaining to the individual buried into the grave. The branch of military service, as you saw before, you could also have a flower program where participants pay to get flowers delivered on a monthly or bi-monthly schedule. Then these fields are going to be available in the add and edit burial screens. Unlike the plot editors, though, there's going to be no way to enter these in bulk, so you're going to be doing them all individually. So we're going to be doing that here in cemetery, maintenance, burial details. Once again, we're going to hit add, and we already have the branch of military services added in there, so we are going to be doing the flower program schedule instead. So we're going to get that saved, and again, as a reminder, that these cannot be entered in bulk, so you're going to be going into each grave individually and to edit them. So we'll end up doing that by going into your cemetery, transactions, burials. You will be adding, or I'm sorry, we're going to be selecting the, in our case, rose flowers, hitting edit. And then in the edit burial screen, we're going to be selecting that additional information that John referenced earlier. And now you're going to see that in addition to the branch of military service are the flower program schedule. So we are going to be able to enter into a value. In this case, it's going to be monthly, and then get that saved. Now I'd like to talk a bit about the entity setup. These are global settings that will affect all transactions that can be accessed there. This will include your specific entity information, the names of your officials, deed formatting, and the default address. You're not going to be using these for one-off type changes. Those should be done when you're doing those. Like for instance, if you want to print a single deed to letter size instead of legal, that should just be done on that print screen and not an entity setup. Same with entering an address for a single out-of-town owner. That should always be done individually and not through entity setup. One can get to entity setup through cemetery, maintenance, entity setup. Now, it's very important to remember that this is only available to administrator accounts. Anyone with a role that's not administrator will not be able to access the entity setup. So if there are any changes that have to be done, this will have to be done through whomever has that administrator role. So when we go into entity setup, it looks quite like this. So it starts off with the entity name, your type, your county, all the general information, including the name of the plots and the plot's location. Then we can have in your officials, in this case, we have Sherry Trustee. And if we want to add someone new, let's say Sherry is a little tired of doing all the cemetery work herself, so she is going to give permissions and add in her husband, Larry Trustee. And we're going to add him in as another township trustee and save it. So that way he'll also be able to sign deeds as well, and it won't all fall on Sherry's shoulders. Now, this right here in the deed format, this is where you can where you'll be able to edit how certain parts of the deed looks. So the first two areas, the header and terms and conditions, anything that you place in there are going to appear in these two areas. So this will determine the formatting for how the top is, and down there under the term and conditions will showcase which grave the plot or the deed is more. So if you're going to be doing notary, you would have this selected so that notary block would get printed out as well. And as we were saying, paper size, you can decide universally what size paper the deeds are going to print on. If you want the footers to have page numbers, you could just select them here. And then the signature lines, this will determine. You might need to play around with it a little bit by moving it from left to right to determine where exactly those lines are going to show up. Then we can have the owners, which will be the default, which of course for us is just a Buckeye, Ohio. And then lastly, backups. The UAN software itself enforces backups. The cemetery software does not. However, we do recommend that you do select the enforced backups and put some type of backups every few days, especially if cemetery is not used that often. We do get calls from people who will be using cemetery maybe once a month or even less frequently. And so in those cases, you'd be wanting to do a backup each time that you go into the cemetery program. So enforcing backups, as I said, is strongly encouraged because unlike the main UAN software, the UAN, we do not get a copy of the data here. So if you haven't done a backup since 2018 and someone comes in and steals the computer by breaking in, then you're going to have years of entries to recreate. Now we're going to come to another section, which is wars. The program comes, well, first we'll go into your century or your cemetery maintenance wars. And this right here can help keep track of different burials that for veterans of different wars. And obviously, we don't list every single war that's possible here. So, depending on whom you have in the cemetery, new additional wars might need to be added. So, we do that by adding, and then you can type in the name. And in this case, we are going to be adding in the Great Zombie War of 2023. And then we can just save that. And then we're going to come to our second area of questions. Is there a report that will show all veteran markers if we add them to plot details? And yes, there is a report that can show all of those individual plot details, so you can print them out individually. So another question, does the war mean the veteran actually served in the war or that they were a veteran in the war area? Um, it basically means that they're a veteran of the war, so someone who did serve in the war. That's usually decided, of course, by the military services. So I had a follow-up question on what institutes whether a veteran is of a specific war or not, saying is there a plaque they received from the Veterans Office means they were actually in the war. That would really be a question of Veterans Office. We're not going to be, it's not our place to determine who was and was not in these wars. So you'd be seeking outside counsel for guidance specifically related to that.
All right, I'm back. So it looks like we're getting quite a few questions here that we're going to need to do a live software demonstration for. So I'm going to take over here, and that way we can just get that up and running. All right, so we've got the UAN Cemetery software open here. We can demonstrate now a couple of the questions that were asked. So let's see here. Let's go with a rose flowers. If she loads. There we are. So the first question we had, how do you mark a cremation versus a full burial? So in the edit burial screen up here in the top right, I make sure you can see that. Yes. So up here in the top right, it's going to give you a status. This is where you can record, buried, cremated, whether it was vandalized, anything of that nature. So you would use that grave status in order to record whether it's basically a full burial or a cremation burial. We also had how to add a cemetery. We're going to do this real quick. We're going to just go through the basics. We're not going to go through any additional formatting that might be needed, just strictly how to add a cemetery. So let's say for some reason or another you acquired a new cemetery, so you'll need to add that in. For our sake of argument, let's just say, Buckeye Cemetery, we got Buckeye Cemetery 2, same layout, same general information, just need to add a second cemetery. So that would be done under cemetery maintenance structures. And you'll see that we went through the example using the grave, but you can also do that with the cemetery as well. So you'll go in here, you can edit that, and you can add in Buckeye 2, let's call it. And then again, you would have to go down that whole list that we discussed earlier. Go through cemetery design, record the owners, print the deeds. If you need to print the deeds, if you acquired a cemetery, you may not necessarily have to do that, and then record the burials as well. So that's just high level how to do it, but it's going to be that same process, or at least a similar process to what we discussed earlier, as far as adding a grave number into the system. Let's see here. Say one person purchases more than one grave in a section, how would the top of the deed look? Well, let's find out together, shall we? What we can do, we go to cemetery transactions, and our top three here are going to be Timothy Turner owned them. So we can print the deed. So it'll ask if you want to include the plots in a single deed. I think for sake of argument, we say yes to that, just to see how that's going to look. And now you'll see too, uh, it pulls in all the deed numbers, and it'll also include that extra trustee that Chris added. So Timothy is a he, and we can preview that. That should bring up, hopefully, what the deed's going to look like. Looks like the system's running a little. So that's what it would look like here. In our case, row A, grave 1, 2, and 3. It'll just list them off. So this is what it would look like by default for you know, an owner of multiple graves within the same cemetery, or at least within the cemetery software. You can also see too that they're listed out specifically down in the terms and conditions as well. So if you have somebody who owns 8 graves, it'll obviously not fit on one line up here. It should go down to a second line, push everything down, and then everything down here would also be the 8 graves would show up here. Where's that report listed in this? I believe that was in regards to the plot details question. I will say no there. So under, let's see, cemetery reports and statements, plot details. So you can see here if you recorded in plot details or burial details for that matter, it's just a difference of which section you go to. In regards to where this report would be, we've got the plot details listing, and that'll pull up basic information. So for our plot details, we had row, grave, owner, and then the value. So our landscaping days being Tuesday, it'll pull in all that information. So you could, if you did it as a plot detail or a burial detail, either one of those reports would show specifically which graves have what values. So in our case, landscaping days are Tuesday, but that's just the only example we have on hand at the moment. Can we quickly go through transfers? We can. I'll warn you, it's very basic. So under cemetery transactions, transfers. So remember, this is going to let you go specifically from one owner to another. So we'll just do A1 for sake of example. Our favorite person, Timothy Turner here, he's going to be the current owner. And let's say, it is no longer needed. It's not going to work in this case. I will warn you, we're not going to be able to post this just because the grave is occupied. We'd have to undo the burial and then do this process. But I'll take you through as far as we can with this. So we've got Timothy Turner here as the current owner. Over in the purchaser tab, this is going to look more like the sell screen now. So the purchaser, let's say it's going to be Barry deceased, and you can pull him up there. And what this is going to do, it functions pretty much identically to the sell screen, but the only difference is you're going specifically from one owner who already owns the grave to a new owner directly. So it's not a situation where the grave gets bought back and then resold. This is, let's say Barry deceased is Timothy Turner's son or something of that matter. It goes directly from one owner to another owner. And like I said, because this grave's occupied, it's not going to let us save it. But ordinarily, you would just click save. In addition to recording deed number, date, price, all that jazz, click save, and it'll still prompt you, would you like to print a deed? We got a question, do all areas of input need to be filled, or can something be left empty and continue? I'll go back to the burial screen just for sake of demonstration here. You'll see that any of these green fields, these are the required fields. So for the burial screen, for example, you do at least need to have a plot, obviously which grave's going to be, the burial's going to be recorded in. You need a first name and a last name. Everything else, as far as requirements go, it's optional. So middle name, suffix, maiden, all this fee section down here, wars, death, cause, and place, details, additional information, what have you. Anything that's not that lovely shade of greenish yellow is going to be considered optional. So you don't necessarily have to fill out all of the information, just anything that's required. So, for sake of a burial, you would need to select the plot, put in first name, last name, and then if the information needs to come at a later time, you can at least save it and record that person is buried there. Although some of the information can still be entered at a later time. We are coming up on the hour here, so you're welcome to stay. We can take some more questions. We can do some more demonstrations here. But here in about a minute, we're going to cross over the 1 hour guideline. So you're welcome to log off if you have no further questions. But like I said, we'll stay around. We'll do some live software demonstrations just to answer any of the other questions here. So if you're logging off, take care. Have a great rest of your day. Everyone who stays, stay with us as long as you'd like. You have no obligation at this point to stay. If you have no further questions, don't need any further demonstration. All right, let's see here. Do you create a new deed for the transfer? That's a good question. I would discuss that with your legal counsel. If it is a case of familial transfer, if the old deed is enough, or if a new deed needs to be printed, I would run that past your legal counsel. I can't give you a definite answer for that. Let's see here. Can you print out a report for all sold lots, and can they be sorted and downloaded in an Excel spreadsheet? Let's see here. So we've got grave reports. So, like the UAN software, any report that ends in export is going to be available to export into Excel. The one I have pulled up is the grave reports. The cemetery software is a little bit limited here as far as the export reports. This may be the only one, but it will let you bring that into Excel and sort it and edit it as needed. But anything that ends in export, that's going to let you do that. If I want to use the software to just print deeds, do the cemeteries have to be set up in the system? Yes, because the deeds aren't going to print correctly if you don't have all the correct information in there. I mean, if you're just using it to print the deeds, I'll be honest, there's probably easier ways to do that. So that would be something to discuss amongst your entity. But for our purposes, yes, you would need to set up the cemetery, make sure all the burials are recorded properly, and that's just so the deeds, when the time comes to print those, they print with all the correct information. Explain buyback. So buybacks, they are situations where your entity is going to be, for some reason or another, be reacquiring a grave location. So let's see here. We'll just grab a random one here. We'll grab B8, Winter Weiss. So let's say that Winter Weiss no longer needs this. Needs this grave site. So she would be able to transfer that back to the entity through this buyback plots, whether it's by way of selling it back or what have you. Sometimes it's donated back, no money changes hands. But basically, again, this is going to look pretty similar to the sell screen, except a lot of these fields aren't going to be available because it's going back to the entity. So there's not going to be a deed number then. There's no price per se, even if it is bought back by the entity. The price isn't going to be put onto that grave, so that's why that's grayed out. You can record the date, you can make some comments, but it's again a very basic screen. It's only going to be used for purposes like an owner needing to transfer the ownership back to the cemetery for some reason or another. So we've got one. What's the newest version available? Version of the software, newest one is going to be version 4.1. You can see it down in the bottom, down here in the bottom right corner. So if you're on 4.0 or anything earlier, contact our support line and we can get you up to the latest version. We did, I will admit, we did glance over one section here. So let's bring up Jimmy Hoffa. We do have a file section here. So we do have the option for photos, documents, if you want to, photo of the burial, as far as the actual grave site itself. If you want to scan the obituary and add it in here, you can. We did glance over this. It's for our purposes, we had nothing to add here. So that's why we skipped over. But we do have this option available, and it actually attaches to the burial itself, not the plot. If working in the cemetery software and you sell the wrong grave to a resident, is it best to do a buyback or a transfer? Quite frankly, you could do either one. The buyback would put it back in your possession and then you could sell it to the correct owner. Or you can do a transfer to go from the incorrect owner straight to the correct owner. Both of them accomplish the same thing. It would be more of a preference than anything. Just make sure up in the comment section for whichever one you choose, just put a comment in that it was done in error. That way, for posterity's sake, you can go back in and look and see, this was transferred, but it wasn't actually, a legitimate transfer. It was, done to correct because it should have been sold. As far as new setups go, so if you, the question is, do we need all previous versions if we're just starting with the cemetery software? No. If you don't have the cemetery software currently, you can just work off of version 4.1 and be done with it. If you're on version 3.0, for example, though, we would have to you would have to install version 4.0 then 4.1. So you would have to do it sequentially, much like the UAN software. But if you're a new user or a prospective new user, then it would just be a case of you can just install 4.1 and start using it immediately. And remember too that this does qualify for fiscal integrity training credit. They changed where that's located, so now on the main auditor estates website under the training dropdown, you've got the training portal login. So that's where you find that now, and it should be live now. So you can go there and record it. All right, any final questions? We'll give you another minute or two if you're typing right now, but then we'll end the presentation if there's nothing further. All right, so we've got no further questions. We're going to go ahead and end the presentation. Thank you so much for attending this. Everyone, have a great rest of your day. Take care.